The soft patter of rain fell against the windows of a small-town diner, casting a misty glow across the quiet street outside. Inside, the hum of soft jazz blended with the low murmur of late-night conversations, creating a comforting sanctuary from the cold, wet evening. This was no ordinary night, however, as two strangers from vastly different worlds were about to cross paths in a way that would forever change their lives. Ryan, a hardworking mechanic, had spent his day repairing engines and troubleshooting car troubles at a small garage. His oil-stained hands and the ache in his shoulders told the story of a man accustomed to tough work. Yet he found solace in the simplicity of the diner's cozy atmosphere. For Ryan, this small corner booth was a place to unwind and forget the burdens of his modest life, even if just for a while. At the same time, Elena, a high-powered business executive, found herself seeking an escape. She was exhausted, not from physical labor, but from the emotional strain of living up to relentless expectations. Beneath her polished image was a woman longing for a moment of anonymity, a fleeting chance to be unseen. What neither of them knew was that a simple bowl of soup and a stranger's kindness would set off a chain of events leading to a bond neither could have imagined. It was a story of kindness that transcended appearances, of connection beyond societal barriers, and of love that would challenge both of them to confront their fears and insecurities. Sometimes, the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most profound transformations. Ryan and Elena's story begins here, on a rainy night, inside a humble diner where two worlds collide. The rain continued to drum gently against the diner's windows, creating a soothing rhythm that mingled with the warm scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. The dim lighting reflected off the damp streets outside, casting a soft glow inside the small establishment. Ryan sat alone at his usual booth in the corner, his rough, calloused hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. His worn flannel shirt and oil-streaked jeans spoke of a man accustomed to honest work. Draped over the back of his chair was a faded leather jacket, still damp from the rain. Despite his exhaustion from another long shift at the garage, Ryan found peace here. The diner was his refuge, a place where no one pried into his life or asked too many questions. Tonight, though, something felt different. At a table near the window, Elena sat quietly, her figure silhouetted by the pale glow of streetlights outside. She was dressed far simpler than the corporate attire she was accustomed to, just a gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. To anyone else, she might have looked like any other diner patron, but her posture was guarded, and her gaze was distant as she stared into the rain. For Elena, this diner wasn't a sanctuary, but an escape. The pressures of her world, endless meetings, looming deadlines, and the ceaseless need to maintain an impeccable image had left her emotionally drained. Tonight, she wasn't a CEO or a socialite. She was just a woman searching for a moment of quiet. A simple bowl of tomato soup sat untouched before her, accompanied by a slice of toast. It was a humble meal, far from the extravagant fare she was used to, but it was enough. She reached for her bag to pay, only to feel a sharp pang of panic. Her wallet was missing. Frantically, Elena searched through her bag, her coat pockets, and even under the table. The young waiter approached, his polite smile fading as he noticed her distress. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, his tone growing impatient. Elena felt her cheeks burn as she stammered. I must have left my wallet behind. I'm so sorry. I can come back tomorrow to pay." The waiter's frown deepened. "I'm sorry, but we have a strict policy. Payment is due before leaving. No exceptions." From his corner booth, Ryan watched the scene unfold. At first he thought it was a minor misunderstanding, but as he noticed the trembling in Elena's hands and the growing embarrassment on her face, something about her vulnerability struck a chord in him. Without hesitation, he rose from his seat, making his way toward the counter. Ryan approached the counter with calm determination, his footsteps muffled by the diner's soft carpet. The tension in the room was palpable, as Elena glanced up, her wide, mortified eyes meeting his. She looked away quickly, her embarrassment deepening. "Hey!" Ryan's voice broke the awkward silence. He addressed the waiter, ignoring the stares of a few curious customers. "I've got it." The young waiter hesitated for a moment before shrugging and taking the crumpled bills Ryan handed over. "All right then," the waiter mumbled, visibly relieved as he walked back to the kitchen. Elena's mouth opened as if to protest, but Ryan turned to her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "It's just a bowl of soup," he said softly. "Everyone has bad days. No need to make a big deal out of it." Her cheeks flushed, and she shook her head. "You didn't have to do that. I could have figured it out." Ryan chuckled lightly, brushing her concern aside. "Maybe. But sometimes it's okay to let someone else help. Trust me, I've been there." His words, spoken with such sincerity, left her momentarily speechless. She wasn't used to this kindness without strings attached, no expectations, no ulterior motives. For a moment, all she could do was nod, her gratitude too heavy to express in words. As Ryan returned to his booth, Elena fumbled for a napkin and a pen from her bag. She scribbled a quick note, folding it carefully before rising from her seat. She walked over to Ryan's table, her movements hesitant but purposeful. "Thank you," she said quietly, sliding the napkin across the table. Her voice, though steady, carried a vulnerability that made Ryan look up. Before he could respond, she turned and left, the bell above the diner door chiming softly as she stepped into the rainy night. Ryan watched her disappear into the mist, the folded napkin still sitting untouched on the table. Curiosity got the better of him, and he unfolded it, his grease-stained fingers smoothing the paper. The note was simple, yet it carried more weight than he could have anticipated. "I owe you. Please let me make this right. Elena." Beneath the message was a phone number, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Ryan stared at the note for a long moment, a faint, curious smile tugging at the corners of his lips. What kind of woman was she? Her vulnerability had felt genuine, but something about her demeanor, poised yet guarded, left him intrigued. He didn't know her story, but something told him their paths weren't meant to cross just this once. Meanwhile, as Elena walked into the night, the sound of rain on the pavement felt strangely calming. The weight of her day hadn't lifted entirely, but Ryan's small act of kindness lingered in her mind. It had been years since anyone had done something so selfless for her, without knowing or caring who she was. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as Elena Novak, the CEO of Novak Enterprises, but as just Elena, a woman trying to navigate the complexities of her life. And as she clutched her coat tightly around her, she resolved to return to that diner, not out of guilt, but because she felt she had found something rare, something real. A few days later, Elena found herself standing outside the small diner once more. The soft glow of its lights spilled onto the wet pavement, a stark contrast to the towering glass buildings she was used to. She took a deep breath, the folded napkin with Ryan's phone number resting securely in her coat pocket. This time, she wasn't here to escape or hide. She was here to make things right. Inside, Ryan sat at his usual booth, a paperback novel open in front of him. Though his eyes scanned the pages, his thoughts were elsewhere, drifting back to the mysterious woman from the other night. Her folded napkin still sat in his jacket pocket, untouched. He hadn't called, unsure if she'd meant for him to. He wasn't sure why he couldn't get her out of his mind. When the bell above the door chimed, Ryan instinctively looked up. His heart stuttered slightly at the sight of Elena stepping inside, her beige coat dusted with raindrops. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled nervously when their eyes met. "Hi," she said softly, walking toward his booth. "Do you mind if I join you?" Ryan blinked, caught off guard, but quickly nodded. Sure. Yeah, of course." She slid into the seat across from him, her movements careful and deliberate. For a moment, Neither of them spoke, the air filled with an awkward, but not unpleasant, tension. Elena finally broke the silence, placing a plain white envelope on the table between them. "I wanted to come back and thank you properly," she began, her voice steady but gentle. "You didn't have to pay for my meal the other night, but you did, and I appreciate it more than you know." Ryan waved a dismissive hand, his modesty shining through. "It really wasn't a big deal. You looked like you were having a tough night. I've been there." Elena smiled softly, pushing the envelope toward him. "Please let me pay you back. It's only fair." Ryan hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside was cash, far more than the cost of a bowl of soup. His brow furrowed, and he shook his head. "This is way too much," he said, sliding the envelope back. "Consider it interest," Elena replied, her tone light-hearted but sincere. For the first time, Ryan chuckled, the sound breaking the tension. "All right, but I think you're overpaying." They both laughed, the moment easing into something more comfortable. Elena leaned back in her seat, her hands resting on the table. "So, do you come here often?" Ryan smirked. "Yeah, it's kind of my spot. After work, it helps me unwind." "What do you do?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. "I'm a mechanic," Ryan replied. "Mostly small repairs, oil changes, brakes, things like that. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills." Elena nodded, her interest genuine. "Do you enjoy it?" Ryan's gaze grew distant for a moment. "I do. I didn't grow up with much, so working with my hands feels honest, simple. But I've always had this dream of owning my own garage someday, something small, local. The kind of place where people trust you, you know?" The quiet sincerity in his voice tugged at Elena's heart. He wasn't chasing wealth or status. He was chasing purpose, something she hadn't heard in a long time. "And you?" Ryan asked, tilting his head slightly. Elena hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "I work in business consulting," she said lightly. "It's not as fulfilling as what you do, but it helps people in different ways, I suppose." Ryan nodded thoughtfully, though there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Their conversation flowed more easily after that. Ryan shared stories from the garage, funny customer mishaps, and moments of triumph when a stubborn engine finally roared to life. Elena, for the first time in years, laughed genuinely. Ryan also confessed his love for classic literature, a surprising passion for someone who spent his days covered in grease and oil. Elena admitted she hadn't read for pleasure in years, her life consumed by work and appearances. The more they talked, the more Elena found herself captivated by Ryan's simplicity, his ability to find joy in the little things, his grounded perspective on life. And for Ryan, Elena's quiet grace and willingness to listen without judgment made him feel seen in a way he hadn't before. As the evening wore on, the bond between them deepened, but beneath Elena's laughter, a quiet guilt gnawed at her. She wasn't lying, not technically, but she wasn't being fully truthful either. Every time Ryan opened up about his life, his struggles and his dreams, she felt the weight of her omission grow heavier. She wanted to tell him the truth about who she was and the life she led, but the fear of losing the connection they had built held her back. For the first time in years, someone wasn't interested in her money, her success, or her name. Ryan saw her as a person, and she wasn't ready to let that go. Days passed, and Ryan and Elena's meetings at the diner became a regular occurrence. Their conversations grew deeper, their laughter more frequent. For Ryan, those evenings became the highlight of his week, a respite from the grime and noise of the garage. For Elena, it was a rare slice of normalcy, where she wasn't defined by her title or bank account. But as their connection deepened, so did Elena's guilt. Every shared story, every moment of vulnerability from Ryan made her feel more conflicted about the truth she was hiding. She wasn't just Elena, a business consultant. She was Elena Novak, CEO of Novak Enterprises, a name that carried weight, power, and wealth far beyond anything Ryan could imagine. One evening, Ryan noticed something unusual. While walking Elena to her car after their usual coffee, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The driver, sharply dressed in a suit, stepped out and opened the door for her. Elena hesitated, her expression unreadable as she glanced back at Ryan. "Is that your car?" Ryan asked, raising an eyebrow. Elena forced a laugh. "It's a friend's. I'll explain later." She slipped into the car, her usual composure faltering for a moment. Ryan watched as the sedan disappeared into the night, a gnawing curiosity taking root in his mind. Something didn't add up. Later that night, back in his modest apartment, Ryan sat at his aging laptop. He hesitated, Elena's name lingering on his thoughts. "Don't be stupid," he told himself. "She deserves her privacy." He stood up, but the image of the luxury sedan and the formality of the driver wouldn't leave his mind. Against his better judgment, he typed her name into the search bar. The results loaded instantly. Elena Novak, CEO of Novak Enterprises, net worth $400 million. Ryan stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. There were photos of her at galas, interviews in glossy magazines, and headlines about her business ventures and philanthropic work. She wasn't just wealthy, she was part of a world he couldn't even fathom. The realization hit him hard. She hadn't lied outright, but she hadn't been honest either. The woman he had been opening up to, the one he'd trusted, was living a life he couldn't relate to. Was their connection even real? Or had he been some kind of curiosity for her, an escape from her high-powered world? The next few days were a blur. Ryan didn't return Elena's calls or texts, his heart torn between anger and confusion. Elena, sensing something was wrong, tried to give him space, though the silence weighed heavily on her. Finally, after several nights of tossing and turning, Elena decided to confront him. She returned to the diner, hoping he'd be there. Ryan wasn't. She sat at their usual booth, her coffee untouched as she stared out into the rainy night. The guilt she had tried to suppress now consumed her. She had spent years building walls, protecting herself from those who only saw her wealth, not the person behind it. But with Ryan, she had felt something real, something she hadn't felt in years, and now she might have ruined it. 2 days later, Ryan finally showed up at the diner, unannounced. Elena had just finished a lonely dinner, her usual confidence replaced by a quiet vulnerability. When she looked up and saw him, her heart leapt, until she noticed his expression. He looked distant, guarded. "Ryan," she breathed, standing. "I've been trying to—" He cut her off, his voice low but filled with emotion. "So, you're not just a business consultant, are you?" Elena's stomach dropped. I can explain." Ryan pulled a folded magazine from his jacket and tossed it onto the table. It was open to a glossy feature article with her face on the cover. The headline read, "Elena Novak, Powerhouse CEO and Philanthropist." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I didn't lie to you, Ryan. I didn't tell you everything." "Well, you—" His voice rose slightly, frustration seeping through. "You let me sit here and tell you everything about my life, my struggles, while you have everything. You're a millionaire, Elena. Why hide it?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because I wanted you to see me. Not my money, not my name. Just me." Ryan shook his head, his jaw tightening. "You think I'd care about your money? That I'd treat you differently if I knew?" Elena's voice cracked. "You don't understand. Every man I've ever met has cared more about my wealth than who I am. I didn't want you to see that version of me. I wanted something real for once." Ryan stared at her for a long moment, his fists clenched at his sides. "Maybe you didn't mean to hurt me," he said finally, his voice quieter now, "but you did." The weight of his words crushed her, but before she could say anything more, Ryan turned and walked out of the diner, leaving her standing alone. The days following their confrontation were a blur of quiet anguish for both Ryan and Elena. Ryan buried himself in work at the garage, his hands tirelessly repairing engines and replacing parts, but no amount of labor could distract him from the ache in his chest. He couldn't shake the image of Elena's tear-filled eyes or the tremble in her voice as she tried to explain herself. But the hurt lingered. Her omission felt like a betrayal. Elena, meanwhile, sat alone in her expansive penthouse, staring at the city skyline that now felt more like a cage than a view. For years, her wealth had been her shield, protecting her from those who wanted to use her. But with Ryan, it had become a barrier, keeping her from the one thing she truly wanted, someone who saw her for who she was. After days of silence, Elena knew she couldn't let things end like this. She needed to make Ryan understand, not just with words, but with sincerity. She wrote him a letter, pouring her heart into every line. The next evening, Elena arrived unannounced at the garage. The space was dimly lit, the scent of motor oil heavy in the air. Tools were scattered across the workbench, and the flickering overhead light cast a soft glow over Ryan, who was hunched over a car engine. "Ryan?" she called softly. He straightened, his expression hardening as he wiped his hands on a rag. "Elena," he said flatly, "what are you doing here?" She stepped closer, but not too close, her hands trembling as she held out a folded letter. "I came because I need you to know the truth. All of it. Please just read this." Ryan hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I think I've heard enough." "No, you haven't," Elena insisted, her voice breaking. She placed the letter gently on the workbench between them. "This explains everything. If you still want me out of your life after reading it, I'll go. No questions, no expectations." For the first time, Ryan saw something different in her eyes. Raw vulnerability. Not the poised, polished woman he thought he knew, but someone who was genuinely scared of losing him. After a long pause, Ryan nodded silently, picking up the letter. Elena watched him for a moment longer, her heart in her throat, before turning to leave. "I'm sorry," she whispered as she walked out, the sound of the rain outside echoing faintly. That night, after locking up the garage, Ryan sat in his small apartment, the letter resting on the coffee table before him. With a steadying breath, he unfolded it and began to read. The letter. "Ryan, I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant to deceive you. When you paid for my meal that night, it wasn't just a kind gesture. It was the first time in years someone treated me like a person, not a paycheck or a name. You saw me before you knew who I was, and for the first time, I felt truly seen. I didn't hide who I was because I thought you weren't good enough. I hid it because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, you'd see me the way everyone else does, as a headline, not a person. I've spent so long being defined by my last name and my wealth that I forgot what it feels like to just be Elena. You reminded me. You showed me kindness and honesty when I needed it most, and I wanted so badly to hold on to that. But in trying to protect what we had, I hurt you, and I'm so sorry for that. And I've never cared about what you have or don't have. I care about your kindness, your strength, and the way you look at life with hope even when it's hard. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know the truth, because you deserve honesty. With all my heart. Elena." Ryan folded the letter carefully, his chest tightening. For the first time, he saw Elena not as the woman on magazine covers, but as the vulnerable, kind-hearted woman who had sat across from him, sharing stories over coffee. He realized the real question wasn't whether he could trust her, but whether he could let go of his own insecurities The answer was clear. Ryan stood outside a towering skyscraper in the heart of the city, his heart pounding in his chest. The sleek glass exterior shimmered in the evening light, and the sound of traffic buzzed faintly behind him. This wasn't his world, it was hers. Inside, a gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the sound of a live orchestra filled the expansive room. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits sipped champagne and exchanged polite laughter, their polished conversations mingling with the elegant ambience. At the center of it all stood Elena. She wore a stunning emerald green gown, her hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. To the crowd she was poised and radiant, the picture-perfect CEO. But Ryan could see through the polished exterior. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Taking a deep breath, Ryan stepped inside, the sharp click of his worn dress shoes on the marble floor drawing a few curious glances. His borrowed tie and slightly wrinkled shirt were out of place among the sea of couture, but he didn't care. He only cared about her. Elena hadn't noticed him yet. She was speaking with a small group of influential figures, nodding politely at whatever one of them was saying. Ryan made his way through the crowd, his focus unwavering. "Erniran," he called softly as he approached. Her head turned, and her eyes widened in shock. "Brian," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the room. The group she was with fell silent, their curious stares fixed on Ryan. He ignored them, his gaze locked on Elena. "I'm sorry for interrupting," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "But I need to say something." Elena blinked, her lips parting, but no words came. Ryan took a step closer, his voice rising just enough to be heard by everyone in the room. "I was wrong, Elena. I let my own fears get in the way. I told myself I wasn't good enough for you, that you deserved someone who could give you more." His voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "But the truth is, I don't care about your money. I never did. I care about you." Gasps rippled softly through the crowd, but Ryan didn't falter. "I care about the woman who sat with me over coffee and laughed at my dumb jokes. The woman who showed me what kindness looks like when I didn't expect it. The woman who taught me that love isn't about what you have, it's about who you are." Elena's eyes shimmered with tears as she stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. Ryan took another step forward, his voice gentler now. "I was scared. Scared that someone like you, someone incredible, could care about someone like me. But I don't want to live with that fear anymore. I don't want to lose you, Elena." For a moment the room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Then a single tear slid down Elena's cheek, and she stepped toward him, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "You were never not enough, Ryan," she whispered, her voice trembling. The world around them seemed to fade as she reached up, cupping his face with her trembling hands. "You never had to prove yourself. You were everything I wanted from the very beginning." Ryan's breath hitched as her words settled over him, and then, before he could respond, Elena closed the distance between them, pressing her lips softly to his. Applause erupted around them, echoing through the grand hall. Ryan didn't hear it. All he felt was the warmth of Elena's arms around him, the steady beat of her heart against his. When they finally pulled apart, Ryan rested his forehead against hers, a soft smile on his lips. "I'm still not great at this public speaking thing," he joked, earning a watery laugh from Elena. "You did just fine," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything was exactly as it should be. The scent of motor oil and fresh paint filled the air, mingling with the cheerful hum of conversation and laughter. Sunlight streamed through the open doors of Ryan's auto shop, casting a warm glow across the freshly polished floors. Today marked the grand opening of Ryan's dream garage, a moment he had worked tirelessly to achieve. A colorful handmade banner reading, "Grand Opening," hung above the entrance, swaying gently in the crisp autumn breeze. Friends, neighbors, and local business owners had gathered to celebrate, their excitement and support filling the space with an energy that felt electric. Ryan stood on a small platform near the entrance, a pair of oversized scissors in hand. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and his hands still bore faint traces of grease, but his smile radiated pride and gratitude. This garage wasn't just a business, it was the culmination of years of hard work and resilience. Standing quietly near the edge of the crowd was Elena, dressed simply in a soft sundress with her hair cascading in natural waves. She wasn't here as a CEO or a millionaire, just as Ryan's partner. She watched him with a mix of pride and affection, her heart swelling at the sight of his happiness. As the crowd quieted, Ryan cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not much of a public speaker," he began, earning a few chuckles. "But I want to thank every one of you for being here today. This garage isn't just a building to me, it's a symbol of everything I've worked for. For the longest time, I didn't think I could do this. I told myself dreams like this were for other people." His eyes found Elena in the crowd, his voice softening. "But someone reminded me that I was wrong. She didn't just believe in my dream, she believed in me." The crowd let out a quiet "oh" as Ryan continued, his gaze locked on Elena. "Elena, thank you. Not just for your support, but for showing me that I was enough all along." Tears shimmered in Elena's eyes as she smiled, stepping forward as Ryan gestured for her to join him. When she reached him, Ryan wrapped an arm around her waist, leaning down to press a tender kiss to her lips. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, the moment filled with raw, undeniable emotion. Later, as the celebration wound down and the sun dipped low on the horizon, Ryan and Elena sat on a wooden bench outside the garage. The soft hues of sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and lavender, the world around them peaceful and quiet. Elena rested her head on Ryan's shoulder, their hands intertwined. "What's next for us?" she asked softly. Ryan smiled, looking out at the glowing horizon. "Whatever we want," he replied, his voice filled with certainty. Together, in that quiet moment, beneath the fading light, they both knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter built on love, trust, and the freedom to be exactly who they were.